Prepare yourself. This is going to be an exercise in critical thinking. Did Plato's Atlantis really exist? If you answered yes to this, I'd like to see your evidence. Really? If you answered no, ask yourself how you came to that conclusion. On what evidence are you basing that answer? Experts? If an event like Atlantis only ever happened once in the entire history of planet Earth, would the supposed experts even know what to look for? What evidence would such an event have left behind? What would an expert look for if they didn't already know that Atlantis was a fantasy? If you're at all familiar with the climate change hoax, alarm bells should be going off about now. The rotten stench of logical fallacies should be quite apparent. What kind of evidence would Atlantis have left behind if it actually existed? How about a huge underwater plateau with islands jutting upward from its raised surface? How about a jumbled ocean floor instead of the more normal, relatively smooth abyssal plain? How about sufficient damage to a tectonic plate boundary that it remains difficult to locate? This is what one geologist said about Plato's location for Atlantis. Quote, "The eastern segment is not so well defined, and deformation spreads over a much broader area." End quote. How about evidence that the island was once a peninsula blocking the Strait of Gibraltar for 600,000 years, turning the Mediterranean into a 3-kilometer deep desert, and at the same time allowing the immigration of the large species of fauna Plato described inhabiting the island? How about evidence that the existence of the island had become such an impediment to tectonic subduction that the entire Africa plate changed direction 36 million years ago, giving birth to the ultra-slow spreading center, the Terceira Ridge? How about 3 items of evidence which suggest that something big happened 9620 BC, right when Plato's Atlantis supposedly sank? What are these 3 pieces of evidence? One was an abrupt change to global climate. If you think the United Nations scare story of plus 3 degrees Celsius of warming per century is worrisome, prepare to freak out. Some parts of the planet experienced a rate of plus 100 degrees Celsius per century of warming for the first decade after the end of the younger Dryas. That massive warming occurred about 9620 BC, suddenly making civilization possible across much of the planet. The second piece of evidence is found in Greenland ice cores of a massive volcanic event 9620.77 BC and continuing for at least 2 years. The third piece of evidence is found in continental shelf ocean sediments, recording in proxies the sea level rise of the last 17,000 years. About 9620 BC, there is evidence to suggest that sea level worldwide abruptly dropped by 2 meters or more. This suggests that a large region suddenly collapsed somewhere in the oceans of the world. None of these facts proves Atlantis existed. So what is the correct response to our original question, did Plato's Atlantis really exist? Based on all of the evidence we do have, the correct response should be, I don't know. That's right. We should be willing to say those 3 little words, I don't know. Too many people are afraid to say that, especially those with reputations to protect. Too many fake experts saying things that they cannot prove. The certainty of arrogance rather than evidence. So what does climate change have to do with the destruction of Atlantis? If the island existed, melting ice may have contributed to its demise. In geology, it's called post-glacial isostatic adjustment. All those mountains of ice had pushed down on the North American continent and on northern Europe. When that ice melted, the continents rebounded, but the areas around that rebound went in the opposite direction, and Plato's Atlantis was right between the 2 regions of energetic rebound. Today, London is experiencing some of this negative adjustment. Some people call it rising sea level, but it's actually both, sea level plus tectonic level. Scotland, on the other hand, is going upward, albeit far more slowly than 12,000 years ago. In Scandinavia, some coastal lakes used to be ocean bays until rising land cut off the adjacent ocean. We also see this effect in the contrast between northern and southern Lake Michigan in the United States. When the ice was melting, the geology was making adjustments far more energetically during what is called the elastic phase of the post-glacial isostatic adjustment. Today, we're experiencing the slower viscous phase. If Atlantis existed, the mountains of ice melting from the continents on both sides of the Atlantic may have been the final nail in its coffin. The collapsing island would have stirred up the Atlantic Ocean, resetting the Gulf Stream that had been shut down for 1,300 years during the Younger Dryas Big Freeze. That ended the Younger Dryas so rapidly, scientists remain puzzled how it could have happened so quickly. The collapse occurring in a volcanic region at the Africa-Eurasia tectonic plate boundary would have likely forced the eruption of at least one volcano, giving us our evidence in the Greenland ice cores, and the massive subsidence would have left a huge void which was filled by the oceans of the world dropping at least 2 meters. If Atlantis existed, climate change contributed to its death, but we don't have to worry. The conditions which conspired against Plato's Lost Island Empire do not exist anywhere else on Earth.